The groom's hands were shaking before the vows even started. Not from nerves. From the man standing in the back of the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 600 guests in silk and diamonds, frozen in absolute silence, because Kang Jae-won had just walked through those doors. And every single person in that ballroom knew exactly who he was. Not from newspaper headlines. Not from television. They knew him the way Seoul's underworld knew him. By the scar through his left brow. By the way armed men stepped aside without being asked. By the fact that 3 security guards had just lowered their radios and bowed their heads like they were in the presence of something older and more dangerous than their employer. The groom, Park Sehun, managed an empire. Real estate, construction contracts, the kind of wealth that made ordinary men feel invisible. He had never felt invisible in his life. Until right now. Because Kang Jae-won was not looking at him. He was looking at her. Arielle stood at the altar, her hands wrapped in cream silk, her braids woven with delicate white flowers, her expression carved from stone. She had not moved a single muscle since those doors opened. She had not turned around. She had not flinched. She had simply stopped breathing. The officiant had stopped mid-sentence. The pianist had forgotten where she was in the song. And Sehun, standing at the end of the aisle where Arielle was supposed to be walking toward him in 43 seconds, felt something cold crawl up the back of his neck. Because the most feared man in Seoul had just crossed his arms, tilted his head slightly, and said 3 words in a voice so quiet the entire room somehow heard every syllable. She's mine. Not a threat. Not a question. A fact delivered with the particular certainty of a man who has never once in his life had to say something twice. Sehun turned to look at his bride. Arielle still had not moved. But her eyes, those eyes that Sehun had spent 2 years convinced were only ever looking at him, had finally shifted. Slowly, deliberately, toward the back of the room. And the expression on her face was not fear. It was not surprise. It was something Sehun had never once seen her wear in 2 years of courtship, in 8 months of engagement, in 300 days of planning this wedding. It was relief. What happened between Arielle and Kang Jae-won? How does a woman end up standing at another man's altar while the most dangerous man in Korea watches from the doorway? And who exactly did Park Sehun think he was marrying? Because the woman gripping those flowers, the woman who had agreed to this wedding, the woman who had smiled at every engagement party and signed every document and worn that ring like it meant something, had been carrying a secret so enormous it had its own gravity. And in exactly the time it takes for one man to speak 3 words in a quiet room, that secret had just walked through the door and claimed her in front of 600 witnesses. You need to hear how this started. Because it didn't start at the altar. It started 3 years ago, with a promise that was never supposed to be broken, a departure that was never supposed to be permanent, and a silence between 2 people so loud it eventually became its own kind of war. Welcome to K-Empire Diaries, besties. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. 3 years. That's how long Arielle Osei had been building a life that didn't include Kang Jae-won. 3 years of carefully constructed distance, of telling herself she was over it, of learning to breathe without the particular ache that came with remembering a man whose hands were the most dangerous things she'd ever willingly walked toward. 3 years of making herself small enough to fit inside a life that was safe. Predictable. Correct. Park Sehun was correct. She had understood this from the beginning. He was educated and generous and kind in all the ways that mattered to other people. He had introduced her to his mother on the 3rd date and remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk and never pushed when she went quiet for reasons she couldn't explain. He was, by every measurable standard, a good man. A better man, probably, than she deserved. She had said yes to his proposal on a Tuesday evening at a restaurant with white tablecloths and a violinist she hadn't seen coming. She had cried. Sehun had taken those tears as joy. She had let him. That was the thing about grief. Performed long enough, it began to look exactly like love. The wedding had been planned for 11 months. 11 months of venue tastings and dress fittings and table arrangements and a color palette that Sehun's mother described as timeless. Ivory and gold and deep forest green. The kind of palette that looked beautiful in photographs and meant absolutely nothing in real life. Arielle had nodded at every decision and felt nothing except a low, persistent hum of wrongness that she had learned to treat like background noise. Like traffic. Like rain against a window. Something you stopped hearing after a while. She had stopped hearing it. Until today. The officiant was midway through a sentence about the sacred covenant of marriage when the doors opened and Arielle felt the hum stop completely. Not fade. Stop. The way a song stops when someone pulls the cord from the wall. Sudden. Final. The absence of it louder than the thing itself had ever been. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes forward, her hands wrapped in cream silk, her braids draped with white jasmine flowers that had taken 3 hours and 4 hands to weave in place. She stood at the altar and she felt him. The way you feel a change in pressure before lightning strikes. The way your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. She heard the collective intake of breath move through 600 people like a wave. She heard Sehun's voice drop. She felt, rather than saw, the moment he went still. She kept her eyes forward. She kept her face carved from stone. She kept breathing. Barely. The officiant stopped speaking. The pianist let the melody dissolve into nothing. And then, in the silence that followed, she heard his voice for the first time in 3 years. Quiet. Certain. Carrying the particular weight of a man who had never once in his life been unsure of anything. She's mine. 2 words. The whole room heard them. The whole room had probably felt them. Arielle closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. The length of a heartbeat. The length of a choice. Then she opened them and turned around. Kang Jae-won stood at the back of the ballroom like the period at the end of a sentence that had been a long time coming. He wore black because he always wore black. His scar caught the chandelier light, the one through his left brow that she had traced with her fingertip once, half asleep, in a moment that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. His arms were crossed. His jaw was set. His eyes were on her with an expression she recognized because she had seen it exactly once before, the night 3 years ago when she had walked out of his life, and he had let her go and she had understood, standing on the other side of that door, that he had meant to. He had not meant to be here tonight. Or he had meant nothing else for 3 years, and this was the result. She would figure that out later. Much later. For now, she was standing at an altar in a wedding dress with 600 witnesses, and a groom who had just turned the color of something that had not been alive for a while. And Kang Jae-won was looking at her like the last 3 years had been a wound he had been walking around with, and someone had finally pulled the dressing off. Park Sehun found his voice first. Security. His tone was quiet but clipped. The kind of quiet that lives very close to panic. Someone remove this man. Nobody moved. This was the thing about Kang Jae-won. Nobody moved when he was in a room unless he told them to. Not the hired security in their earpieces and polished shoes. Not the general manager of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, who was standing in the corner looking like he was reconsidering his career choices. Not the 8 armed men who were technically employed by Park Sehun and had, at some point in the last 30 seconds, silently recalculated the math of their own survival. Nobody moved because Kang Jae-won had not told anyone to move. And because the 3 men who had walked in behind him wore the kind of stillness that only came with having done very specific things in very specific circumstances, and everyone in this room understood instinctively that this was not a moment to be heroic. Sehun took a step forward. I don't know who you think you are. He knows who I am. Jae-won's eyes finally shifted. Just for a moment. Just long enough to look at Sehun the way a man looks at something that was there before he arrived and will be irrelevant after he leaves. Then his eyes returned to Arielle. She knows who I am. Arielle was still standing at the altar. She had not moved toward him. She had not moved away. She stood with her flowers and her silk and her braids, and she looked at this man who had broken her heart with such clean precision 3 years ago that she had spent months afterward convinced it hadn't happened, and she felt something she did not want to name settling into the center of her chest. The room was still waiting. 600 people, collectively, waiting to find out what she would do next. She looked at Sehun. His face was a study in controlled devastation. He was a good man. She had known that from the beginning. He did not deserve what was happening right now. He did not deserve any of it. Sehun, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. I need a moment. The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence than the one that had greeted Jae-won's entrance. That silence had been fear. This one was something closer to a held breath before a fall. Sehun looked at her. He looked at the man at the back of the room. He looked back at her. And he must have seen something in her face, some truth she hadn't meant to show, because the expression that crossed his features then was not anger. It was recognition, the particular kind that meant he had known something was wrong for a long time and had simply chosen not to ask the question directly because he was afraid of the exact answer that was happening right now. Arielle, he said. Just her name. The way a person says a name when they already know it's over, and the word is more goodbye than hello. I'm sorry. She meant it. She meant it in every direction. I am so sorry. She moved down the aisle before she had decided to, her feet carrying her toward the back of the room, toward the man she had spent 3 years trying to forget, past 600 witnesses who would have something to talk about for the rest of their lives, past the flower arrangements and the string quartet and the wedding cake that had cost 800,000 won and that she would never cut. She walked in her wedding dress down the aisle in the wrong direction, away from the altar and away from the life she had constructed so carefully over 3 years of trying to be someone who didn't love Kang Jae-won. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see that his jaw was tighter than she remembered, close enough to see the thing in his eyes that he was not allowing his face to show. She looked up at him. You have about 45 seconds before this becomes a scene. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. Not quite. I've been trying to figure out where to have this conversation for 3 years. You could have called. I did. Once. You blocked my number. She had. He was not wrong. This isn't the place, she said. No, he agreed. But every other place I could think of didn't have you in it. And I've been standing outside places that didn't have you in them for 3 years, Arielle, and it turns out I'm done doing that. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her she was aware of Sehun's quiet, the murmur beginning to spread through 600 people who had just watched something they had not come here to see. The clicking of phones recording what would become the most watched wedding video in Seoul for the next calendar year. She looked at him, and she felt the thing she had spent 3 years building dissolve like it had been made of something that wasn't designed to last. Your car, she said. He nodded once. He stepped aside. She walked through the door. The last thing she heard before the ballroom doors closed behind her was Sehun's voice, very quiet, very measured. Get me my attorney. The cold October air hit her face like an answer. Jae-won's car was black and waiting at the foot of the steps. His driver did not look at her. His security did not speak. She got into the back seat, and the door closed with the particular solidity of a vehicle designed to protect the people inside it. And she sat with her bouquet in her lap and her wedding dress pooled around her feet, and she stared at the Seoul skyline through tinted glass, and thought about what it meant that the most relieved she had felt in 3 years was 30 seconds after she walked away from the man she had promised to marry. Jae-won got in beside her. The car moved. Neither of them spoke for a full city block. Where are you taking me? She asked. Somewhere quiet. That's not an address. No, he said. It's not. He was looking out his window, profile sharp against the passing streetlights. She had forgotten, in the way the mind mercifully edits out the things that cause pain, exactly how beautiful he was. Not in the soft way. In the way of a landscape that was magnificent precisely because it was dangerous. In the way of something that did not belong to anyone, and that you wanted anyway, in the particular desperate fashion that meant you had no business wanting it. Why tonight? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I found out 2 weeks ago. Found out what? That you were getting married. His jaw moved. I should have come sooner. I knew that before I came. I knew it before I hired someone to find you. I knew it every day for 3 years when I told myself it was better this way. It was better this way. It wasn't. She looked at her bouquet. White roses and baby's breath and sprigs of eucalyptus that Sehun's mother had picked out because she had read somewhere that eucalyptus was symbolic of protection. Arielle had held them for 2 hours in a dressing room while someone pinned her dress, and she had not once thought about what they meant. She thought about it now. You let me walk away, she said. Not accusatory. Just a fact being laid down somewhere it could be examined. Yes. You didn't fight for it. No. You let me pack my things. You let me leave. You didn't call, except once, apparently, and I blocked the number and I moved to a different neighborhood and changed my routines, and I spent the better part of a year convincing myself that what we had was not what I thought it was, because that was the only explanation I could find for why you just let me go, and then I met Sehun, and she stopped. He was there, and he wanted me there, and I was tired. Jae-won turned from the window. He looked at her in the way he had always looked at her. Like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. Like everything else was noise. I know, he said. That's all you have? You know, I have more than that. His voice was quiet. I have 3 years of getting it wrong. I have 3 years of knowing I got it wrong and not knowing how to fix it. I have a conversation I've been rehearsing since August that is absolutely nothing like this one because I did not account for you wearing a wedding dress." He paused. I should have accounted for that. Something cracked open in her chest. She had not wanted it to. She pressed her lips together and looked out her window and told herself not to cry, because she had done her crying already. She had done it 3 years ago in an apartment that no longer existed in a life that felt very far away. And she was not going to undo all of that work in the back of a car because Kang Jae-won had finally decided to show up. "You can't do this," she said. "You can't just appear at my wedding and say 2 words and expect everything to reset. I know that. You ruined a man's wedding tonight. He'll be fine. You don't know that. He's a good man with a lot of money and enough sense to know that a woman who was almost his wife just walked away from him at the altar. He'll grieve it. He'll recover. He's not going to spend 3 years pretending it doesn't hurt while trying to rebuild a life around the absence of someone he stopped himself. She looked at him. Someone he what? A long pause. Someone he loves, Jae-won said. That's what I was going to say. The word landed between them. She let it sit. You never said that, she said. Before. You never said that word. I know. Why are you saying it now? He looked at her, and she saw it then. The thing under the control. The thing under the untouchable certainty that he wore like armor. Something raw and unguarded and terrified in the very specific way that powerful men are terrified when they have finally run out of places to hide from their own feelings. Because I'm out of time, he said quietly. Because you were 600 feet from being someone else's wife, and I finally understood that I would rather blow up every wall I have ever built than stand on the other side of another door while you disappear inside a life I am not in. Arielle looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning. I need to understand what happened 3 years ago, and I need you to tell me the truth, not the version that protects you. He nodded. And then, she said, I am going to decide what happens next. Not you. Not the 600 people at your back. Me. Yes, he said. Okay. She set the bouquet on the seat between them. Talk. The car moved through Seoul. The city was indifferent and glittering and going about its evening the way cities did. All yellow light and midnight traffic and lives colliding and separating in the ordinary way. Out here, 600 people were texting and posting and calling their friends about what they had just witnessed. Sehun was somewhere being told by his attorney that tonight had changed several things. And inside this car, Kang Jae-won was taking a breath and beginning to tell the truth, which was, in his experience, the most dangerous thing a man in his position could do. He began where it began. 3 years and 7 months ago. Arielle Osei had walked into a situation that was already in progress. This was important context, the kind of context that did not excuse anything, but made it possible to understand how it had happened. Jae-won's empire was not the kind of thing that tolerated complications. It had taken him 8 years to build, and it ran on fear and precision, and the understanding among everyone involved that nothing personal could be allowed to touch it. That was the rule he had operated under since the age of 22. Nothing personal. And then Arielle had happened. At a charity gala that she was attending as a guest of the law firm where she worked as a corporate attorney, and that he was attending because the Kang family name was stitched into the donor wall, and his presence was expected. She had been standing near the bar in a dress the color of cognac, and she had turned to look at him with the particular expression of someone who was not impressed, which was unusual, because people were always something when they looked at him, afraid or deferential or calculating, and she was none of those things. She was simply looking at him the way a person looks at a man at a bar. Straightforwardly. Without agenda. You're Kang Jae-won, she'd said. And you are. Someone who is about to tell you that you're standing in front of the only decent Sauvignon Blanc in this room, so you can either move or I can reach over you and pour my own glass. He had moved. And then he had stayed. And that was how it had started. For months of something he could not name. She was not afraid of him. She was not trying to use him. She was not performing any of the things women sometimes performed around him. The availability, the eagerness, the careful orchestration of seeming just indifferent enough to be interesting. She was simply herself. She argued with him about things that did not matter to anyone with power and debated things that mattered enormously to her. Access to legal aid for people who couldn't afford representation, the particular corruption in a property development deal she'd been tracking for work, the way certain systems were designed to look like accidents when they were actually architecture. She was brilliant and exasperating, and she laughed at things he said that he had not meant to be funny, and she cooked Nigerian food in his kitchen on Saturday mornings and ate it cross-legged on his floor because she said his dining table felt like a boardroom. And she was right, it did, and she was the only person who had ever said so. He had fallen. Completely. Quietly. In the way he fell into things that mattered, without announcement, without ceremony, just a slow deepening until there was no bottom anymore. And then his father had called him in. This was 3 years and 3 months ago now. A Thursday in the Kang family's fortress in Gangnam. All dark wood and ancestral portraits, and the weight of everything his father had built bearing down from every wall. Kang Jae-won had been 65 years old then, silver-haired and cold-eyed and utterly convinced of his own correctness in the way of men who have never once in their lives been seriously challenged. He had laid it out simply. The Kang family had been approached by the Oh family. The Oh family's eldest daughter, Oh Soo-yeon, was educated and suitable and willing. A merger of the two families, formalized through marriage, would solve several problems at once, consolidate territory that had been disputed for 2 years, eliminate a potential rival, and produce an heir that the Kang name could be attached to with appropriate gravity. The Kang name needed an heir. An heir needed a mother whose lineage was not complicated. What he had with Arielle was, his father had said, a complication. Jae-won had sat in that room and looked at his father and felt something break very quietly in a part of himself he had not known was still capable of breaking. He had thought himself past that, past the particular damage of hearing his father reduce a living person to the word complication. He had been wrong. He did not fight. This was the thing he was ashamed of. He did not argue or threaten or walk out. He sat in his father's office and he thought about what his empire cost, what it had always cost, what he had already paid for it, and what it would take from him if he let it. And he made the choice that he had been making since he was 22 years old. He chose power. He told himself it was mercy, that she deserved better than a life chained to his world, that she would be safer without him, that the kind of danger that came with his name was too high a price to ask someone to pay. He told himself many things. He ended it the following Monday. Clean and surgical, the way he did everything. He told her it wasn't working. He said the words he thought would leave the smallest wound. She had looked at him with those eyes, and he had understood then, standing in his own living room, that there was no way to do this that did not leave a wound, that the only variable was who it destroyed and who it merely marked. She had not begged. She had not cried. She had nodded once, gone to the guest room, packed a bag, and walked out. She had not looked back. He had stood at his window and watched her go and felt the particular kind of silence that follows an irreversible act. 2 weeks later, his father had called to confirm that dinner with the Oh family was scheduled for the following Friday. Jae-won had attended. He had shaken hands and said the correct things and returned home and sat in his kitchen in the dark for 4 hours in the particular way of a man trying to calculate the exact price of a choice he could no longer unmake. He had not married Oh Soo-yeon. In the end, the deal had fallen apart for reasons that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the Oh family's own internal collapse, a truth his father had never entirely forgiven. He had restructured the disputed territory through other means. He had solved the problem his father had presented, just not the way his father had intended. And Arielle had been gone, and he had not called, except once, on a Tuesday night 11 months later, from a number she did not recognize, and she had let it ring twice and then blocked it. And he had never tried again because the blocked number felt like the clearest sentence she had ever said to him. He told her all of this in the back of the car, while Seoul moved past the windows. When he finished, the silence between them was a different kind than any they had shared tonight. It was the kind that follows a truth being put down somewhere and examined from all angles. "You chose your father," she said. "Yes. And you regret it. Every day. That's not enough." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. "What do you want from me, Jae-won?" "Not tonight. In the long run. What is it you actually want?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, very simply, "You. You can't just want me. I'm not a thing to be wanted. I'm a person. With a life. With a career. With feelings that you already broke once, and that I spent a significant amount of time and energy putting back together." "I know. Stop saying you know. What do you plan to actually do about it?" He turned to look at her fully. "Whatever you tell me to do. Whatever it takes. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I can be someone who deserves those things." She looked at the bouquet sitting between them. White roses going slightly soft at the edges from being held for 2 hours. I need to go home, she said. I need to change out of this dress, and I need to call Sehun, and I need to figure out what my life looks like in the next 24 hours, because tonight has been, she stopped. Tonight has been a lot. I know. Stop. Yes, he said quickly. Yes. I'll take you wherever you need to go. She told the driver her address. The car shifted direction. Jae-won sat beside her and did not reach for her hand and did not say anything else, and she was acutely aware of the distance between them, the few inches of leather seat separating them, and how charged that distance was, how it had its own specific gravity. She thought about 3 years of building walls around a wound, and how one man walking through a pair of doors had made all of it suddenly irrelevant. She thought about relief. The particular specific relief of turning around in a wedding dress, and seeing a face she had told herself she was done with. She did not think about what that meant yet. She was not ready to think about what that meant. The car stopped in front of her building. She reached for the door. He did not stop her. She stepped out, and the night air was cold, and the silk of her dress whispered against the pavement, and she turned back to look at him through the open door. I'm not forgiving you, she said. Not tonight. I'm not asking you to. But I'm going to need you to tell me how this works. If this is real. What it actually looks like. He held her gaze. Tell me when and where, and I'll be there. She nodded once. She closed the door. She walked into her building with her bouquet in one hand and 3 years of carefully maintained distance already beginning to come apart at the seams, and she told herself she was not going to think about the look on his face when she said she was not forgiving him tonight. As if the fact that she'd said tonight rather than ever had been the most important word in the sentence. Because it had been. And they both knew it. She changed out of her dress in 7 minutes, folded it neatly on the foot of her bed, sat down in the sweater and leggings she'd changed into, and called Sehun. He answered on the second ring. Are you safe? He asked first. She had always known he was a good man. Yes, she said. I'm so sorry. Don't, he stopped. Then, carefully. I need some time. Of course. And I need to know. His voice was measured. Precise. The voice of a man who had been holding himself together since the moment the doors opened. What I thought we were. Was any of it real? The question went through her like something sharp and clean. Yes, she said. It was real. It just wasn't. She pressed her lips together. It wasn't everything. And you deserved everything. Silence. Long enough for it to mean something. He's Kang Jae-won, Sehun said finally. Not a question. Yes. I see. Another pause. I need you to not contact me for a while, Arielle. I understand. I'm going to be fine. He said this the way people said things when they were not yet sure if they were true, but were committed to making them true through the act of saying them. I'm going to be absolutely fine. I know you will, she said. You're a good man, Sehun. You deserve someone who can give you everything. He was quiet. Then, so do you. He ended the call. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time after. The building made its quiet nighttime sounds. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul did, indifferent and blazing and enormous. She thought about her mother, who was in Accra right now, and would not see the wedding video circulating on Seoul's social media until morning, at which point she would call and Arielle would have to explain. And that conversation would be complicated in the specific way of conversations with mothers who had always suspected their daughters were not over someone but had politely declined to say so directly. She thought about Kang Jae-won's face in the back of that car. The way he had looked at her without flinching while he told her the worst version of himself. She picked up her phone. She opened her contacts. She had deleted his number 3 years ago. She did not have it anymore. She thought about that for a moment. Then she opened a text thread she had with a mutual acquaintance, sent a quick message, and 3 minutes later had the information she needed. She typed, "This is Arielle. I am at home. I am fine. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the cafe on Dongodero. We're going to talk, and this time I need you to actually tell me what comes next. The reply came immediately. I'll be there. She put her phone down. She breathed. Outside her window, Seoul was going about its night. Somewhere out there, a man who had walked into a wedding and said 2 words was probably also sitting in a dark room trying to breathe. She thought about 3 years of wrongness that had felt like background noise. She thought about the moment she turned around and felt it stop. She thought about the word tomorrow and what it meant that she was already counting the hours. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she did, It was the deepest sleep she'd had in months. The cafe on Dongodero was small and warm and smelled like roasted beans and something cinnamon adjacent, and Arielle arrived 7 minutes early because she was always 7 minutes early, and today of all days she needed to be in a space before he arrived, to claim the ground, to let herself settle. She ordered an Americano she did not want and sat at the table farthest from the window, which was the table with the best view of the door, and she wrapped both hands around the cup and told herself this was fine. This was a conversation. She was a corporate attorney who had argued in front of investors and executives and people who wanted to believe she did not belong in the room. And she had won those arguments, and she could certainly sit across from one man and have a conversation without doing something she would regret. The door opened at exactly 10 a.m. Kang Jae-won walked in, and the barista dropped something behind the counter. Arielle watched him scan the room, find her, and cross to her table with that particular walk that suggested he had never in his life been uncertain about where he was going, only about what he would find when he got there. He sat down across from her, close enough that she was aware of his presence the way she was aware of weather. "You slept?" he asked. "Eventually." She looked at him. His eyes were shadowed. "You didn't." He did not confirm or deny this. He flagged the barista, ordered black coffee, looked at her. "You said you wanted to know what comes next," he said. "I want to understand the current situation first." She set her cup down. "Because you walked into a wedding last night, which is not a small thing. And before I do anything with any of this, I need to understand what your world looks like right now. The empire, the family, the complications. My father retired 8 months ago. Health." His voice was even. "My uncle chairs the board of the legitimate holdings. The underground operations, the territory my father spent 30 years building, I've been restructuring for 2 years. Restructuring. Pulling out of the networks that can't be cleaned. Repositioning into legal enterprise. Shipping, hospitality, private security. He paused. It's a long process. There are people who benefit from the current structure who do not want it changed. There are complications. Dangerous complications. Some." She looked at him steadily. "I'm a corporate attorney, Jae-won. I know what restructuring looks like when it's real, and what it looks like when it's a word used to describe the performance of change." The corner of his mouth moved. "Which does this look like?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm asking." She leaned forward slightly. "Your father's objection 3 years ago. Your lineage, his empire, his expectations. Those haven't changed. I'm still the same person I was 3 years ago. Ghanaian, foreign, outside the hierarchy he spent his life constructing. The thing he objected to hasn't changed. My father's opinion is no longer the determining factor in my life. That's easy to say. I walked into your wedding last night in front of 600 people and said that you were mine." His voice was quiet, unmistakable. "I would like you to tell me what part of that reads as easy." She held his gaze. He held hers. "Point," she said finally. He looked at her for a moment in that way he had always had. The way that made her feel like every wall she'd built was transparent, and he was simply choosing to be polite about being able to see through all of them. "I'm not asking you to go back to what we were," he said. "What we were was not enough. I did not give you what you deserved, and I knew it at the time, and I chose not to examine that too closely, because examining it required me to make choices I was not ready to make. I'm asking for something different now." "What does different look like?" "I don't know exactly." He said it without apology, which she appreciated. She had always trusted him more when he admitted not knowing than when he pretended certainty. "I know that every decision I make, I want you to be part of it. Not the empire decisions. The decisions that matter. I know that I have spent 3 years understanding the specific shape of what I gave up, and that understanding has made me a person who is no longer willing to prioritize the wrong things." He paused. "And I know that I am sitting in this cafe asking you for something I have no right to ask for, and I am asking for it anyway, because apparently running out of time does that to a person." Arielle looked at him. She had always been good at reading people. It was part of why she was good at her work. The ability to look past the surface presentation and find the thing underneath. She looked at him now, and she looked for the calculation, for the performance, for the carefully orchestrated vulnerability that men in his position sometimes deployed when they needed something. She did not find it. What she found was something messier, something raw around the edges, something that looked like a man who had finally been honest with himself and was living in the uncomfortable aftermath of that. "I need time," she said. "Yes. I'm not," I'm not going to just walk into whatever this is because you showed up at the right moment. I spent 2 years with Sehun. I made promises I couldn't keep. That matters to me. The fact that I walked away from that doesn't mean I'm walking straight toward you. I need time to understand what I actually want. I'll wait. You don't know how long that might take. I'll wait, he repeated. The same quiet certainty as last night. The same particular stillness. However long. She picked up her coffee cup, wrapped her hands around it, thought about the specific quality of a man who had always been certain about everything, sitting across from her saying words like however long, as if he had decided to reorganize his entire relationship to time around her decision. I want to be clear about something, she said. If we do this, if we go back into each other's lives in any serious way, the first time something happens, the first time your world puts me in danger or your family makes me a complication or you make a choice that pushes me out, I am not coming back from it a second time. Do you understand? Once. I can give this once. Not twice. I understand. You don't get another 3 years of regret at my expense. No, he agreed. I don't. She set down her cup. Then I need you to give me 2 weeks. No contact. I need to get my head clear, figure out what my actual feelings are versus what they are in the context of last night, and then I'll call you. He nodded. And in the meantime, she said, I need you to do something for me. What? Tell me what you meant when you said there are dangerous complications with the restructuring. Because I'm not walking into something blind, and if we are going to be in each other's lives, I need to understand what kind of lives those are. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. She had always been able to tell when she surprised him, and she was surprising him now, the same way she had surprised him at that gala by asking for the wine instead of being impressed by his name. There are 3 families, he said, who benefit from the Kang network in its current form. When I move to restructure, it redistributes power in ways that disadvantage them. One of those families, the Beck family, has been applying pressure. Threats. Not direct ones. Indirect. Interference with legitimate business operations. Removal of key personnel from situations where they were needed. A message last month that was technically a business communication and practically an ultimatum. And I am handling it. His jaw moved. Through legal means where possible. Through other means where necessary. Are you in danger? He looked at her steadily. I'm always in some danger. That is the honest answer. The question is the degree and the source, and whether I have managed it adequately. Are the people around you in danger? The question landed differently than the one about him. She saw it. He saw her see it. I'm taking steps, he said carefully, to ensure that people in my immediate circle are protected. That's not an answer. Arielle. He said her name the way he had always said her name. Like it had weight. Like it cost something. I am not going to promise you that being near me is without risk. That would be a lie, and you told me yesterday that you wanted truth. The truth is that my world is what it is, and what it is exists on a spectrum of danger that I am actively working to move down. But I'm not there yet. And if that is a line you cannot cross, I need to know that now. She looked at him for a long time. I know what your world is, she said finally. I knew what it was 3 years ago. I'm a corporate attorney. I read between lines for a living. I knew who I was sitting across from at that gala. She paused. What I'm asking is whether you're going to tell me the truth when things are difficult, or whether you're going to manage me the way you manage everything else. He was quiet for a moment, and she could tell from the quality of his silence that the question had landed somewhere real. The latter, he said. That's what I have always done. Managed. Controlled information. Kept things clean. He looked at her. I would like to tell you that I've outgrown that, but I don't know yet if I have. I know I want to. At least that's honest. I'm trying. He said it simply. That's what 2 weeks is for. Not just for you. For me as well. To think about what I'm actually offering, and whether it's something worth offering. She was not expecting that. She looked at him across the table. This man who had always been the most certain person in every room he occupied, saying something vulnerable in a cafe on Dongodero at 10 in the morning, and she felt something complicated and warm shift inside her chest. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks. She stood up. She picked up her bag. And Jae-won, the wedding last night. I need you to understand that I'm going to spend some of these 2 weeks dealing with the fallout of that. My phone has been going since I woke up. My friends have opinions. Sehun deserves to be treated with dignity in how this is handled publicly. He nodded. I'll have nothing said that reflects poorly on him. I mean that I'm not going to be seen participating in whatever narrative positions him as the person who was simply in the way. He wasn't in the way. He made the mistake of loving someone who wasn't done loving someone else. That's a different thing. He said it evenly. It's not his fault. I won't make it look like it is. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she left. The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest kind of limbo. Arielle went to work and sat in meetings and reviewed contracts and existed in her life with the particular quality of someone who is going through the motions because the real thing, the actual central thing, is currently suspended somewhere beyond her reach. Her phone never stopped. Her friend Nia, who was a fashion editor and had an opinion about everything, called 3 times in the first day and then appeared at her apartment with wine and said, "I need you to start from the absolute beginning and tell me everything." Her colleague Jung-hyun sent a single text that said, "Are you okay?" and she sent back yes, and he sent back good, and that was that. Her mother called from Accra on day 2. That conversation lasted an hour and ended with her mother saying, very quietly, "I always thought that man looked at you like you were the only fixed point in a room full of moving things." And Arielle saying, "That's not helpful, Mama." And her mother saying, "No, but it's true." She did not look at her phone except for work. She ran 4 miles every morning and worked long hours and cooked elaborate dinners. She did not entirely eat and tried very hard to think clearly about what she actually wanted, which was made more complicated by the fact that what she actually wanted had been obvious to her since approximately the moment she turned around in her wedding dress. The question was not what she wanted. The question was what she was willing to risk for it. On day 10, something happened that answered that question before she was entirely ready to answer it. She came out of her building at 7 in the morning to find a car she did not recognize parked directly across the street. This was not unusual in Seoul. What was unusual was the quality of attention the man inside the car was paying to her building's entrance. She noticed it the way she noticed things. With the particular peripheral awareness she had developed during the years, she had known what Jae-won's world looked like and had learned to pay attention to the edges of her vision. She walked to work the long way. She called him. The 2 weeks were not yet up. She didn't care. He answered on the first ring. No preamble from her. "There's a man in a blue sedan parked outside my building who has been watching the entrance for at least the last 15 minutes. A beat of silence. Then, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very controlled. "Go directly to your office building. Do not stop. I'll handle it. Jae-won, I'll call you in 10 minutes. He paused. "Are you walking now?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause barely there. "Don't look back." She did not look back. She walked the 8 blocks to her office and went inside and sat at her desk, and exactly 9 minutes and 40 seconds after she had ended the call, her phone rang. It was a Beck family associate, he said. "Low level. He won't be watching your building again." "What does that mean, he won't be watching my building again?" "It means he's been discouraged." Decisively. "Jae-won." She kept her voice level. "The Beck family is watching me. They became aware that we are no longer unconnected." A pause. After last night's events were rather publicly documented. She pressed her lips together. "So the dangerous complication is now aware that I exist as a potential leverage point." "Yes. And you're telling me this now rather than managing the information." A pause. "Yes. I see." She breathed. "What are you doing about it?" He told her. He told her in detail that surprised her. Not because the measures were excessive, but because he laid them out fully, without softening them for her benefit, without making the situation sound more manageable than it was. He told her about the Beck family's known associates, the current structure of the dispute, what he was doing to resolve it, and the realistic timeline for that resolution. He told her who he had assigned to monitor the situation around her building and her office, and what his instructions to them were. He told her what to do if she felt followed again. He told her all of it. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment. "You're not managing me," she said. "No. You said you didn't know if you'd changed." "I think you have. A little. A quiet. Maybe. I'm calling the 2 weeks early," she said. "Come to dinner. Tonight. My apartment. 7 o'clock. And bring your actual timeline for resolving this Beck situation, because if we're going to do this, I need to be kept in the loop, not protected from information." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she wondered if she had said too much too fast. Then, 7 o'clock. "Don't be late." "I won't." She put the phone down. She sat at her desk and thought about what she had just done. About the difference between knowing what you want and deciding you are willing to take the risk of wanting it. She thought about her mother's voice. That man looked at you like you were the only fixed point in a room full of moving things. She thought about relief. The specific kind. The kind that feels like a held breath finally released. She opened her laptop. She had 3 contracts to review before noon. She would review them and do her work, and at 7 o'clock tonight Kang Jae-won would walk through her door, and they would sit across from each other in her apartment like 2 adults who had made a decision and were willing to live with what came next. She was not afraid, she realized. She was afraid of many things, had been afraid of many things for 3 years. But right now, looking at what was actually in front of her, she was not afraid. She was finally going in the right direction. Dinner was lamb stew and jollof rice that took her 3 hours to make, 2 of which she spent on the phone with her mother talking through the recipe and the situation simultaneously, because her mother had a gift for conducting 2 conversations at once and not losing track of either. The apartment was clean and warm, and she had changed 3 times before settling on something that was not trying too hard and was not trying at all, which turned out to be dark jeans and a deep burgundy top that her mother said made her look like someone who knew what she was doing. He arrived at exactly 7. He had not brought flowers, which she appreciated, or wine, which she had not needed, but he had brought a folder of documents which he placed on her kitchen counter and said, "The Beck situation in detail as promised." And she thought that was actually the most correct thing he could have done. They ate at her kitchen table because he did not have a kitchen table of his own, only the boardroom dining surface she had objected to 3 years ago, and apparently he still had. And she did not say anything about that, but filed it away as something to address in the future. The future. She was thinking about the future. That was new. He ate with the focused appreciation of someone who had been living on hotel food and restaurant meals for years, and had genuinely forgotten what it tasted like when food was made by someone who was making it for you specifically. He said nothing explicit about this, but she watched his face while he ate, and she could tell. "My mother's recipe," she said. "She made it on birthdays. Tell me about her." So she did. She talked about her mother, the professor, who taught Achabi and Adichie and had strong opinions about sentence structure and men who didn't finish what they started. She talked about growing up in Accra with a father who was an architect and a mother who filled every wall of their house with bookshelves, and about coming to Korea for law school on a scholarship that had felt like being handed a door and told to walk through it, even though she didn't know what was on the other side. She talked about the version of herself she had been at 23, sharp-edged and optimistic and certain that being good at her work would be enough of a foundation. He listened with the quality of attention she had always noticed in him. The kind that meant he was actually receiving information, rather than waiting for his turn to speak. "What about you?" she said. "Your mother." His expression shifted slightly. "She died when I was 11. Cancer." "I'm sorry. She was very different from my father." "Very." He looked at his hands. "She used to say that power without love was just loneliness with better furniture." A pause. "I thought about that a lot in the last 3 years." Arielle looked at him. Something quiet moved through the space between them. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have said you were the kind of woman who asked questions because she was paying attention, not because she was afraid. Your father's opinion is the one that did damage." "Yes." He held her gaze. "And I let it. For too long, I let my father's version of the world be the only version that existed. He built something enormous, and he handed me the keys to it, and I was so grateful for the keys that I stopped asking what the building was for." He paused. "I know that's not a sufficient explanation for what I did. I know it doesn't fix it." "No," she said. "But it helps me understand it." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, Seoul was doing its evening thing. The apartment felt warm and present in a way she had not realized she'd been missing. "The documents," she said eventually. He opened the folder. For the next hour, they sat side by side at her kitchen table and went through the Beck situation in the kind of detail that she was used to from boardroom presentations, and that was unusual in the context of a first dinner, but which was, she felt, exactly right for who they were to each other. She asked questions that cut to the center of things. He answered without evasion. She pointed out 2 places where his legal strategy had gaps and 1 place where he had made a tactical assumption that was not supported by the information he had. He listened to all 3 observations and amended the folder accordingly. At some point she realized that he had put a hand on the table near hers. Not touching, just near. She moved her hand an inch closer. He looked at her. She did not look away. "I'm still not forgiving you," she said. To be completely clear. I know. A quiet. But you moved your hand. I noticed. What does that mean? She considered. It means I'm in this. Which is not the same as forgiveness. It means I'm willing to see what this becomes if we do it properly. With truth. Without the parts where you decide I can't handle information. Yes. And with the understanding that I am not an accessory to your empire. I have my own work, my own career, my own world, and if this is going to exist, it exists alongside those things, not instead of them. I never wanted you to be an accessory. He stopped himself. Tried again. I wanted you in my life the way someone is in your life when they're the center of it. Not the periphery. Not a separate thing that exists in a different compartment. I wanted mornings and dinners and arguments about things that don't matter, and being known by someone who isn't afraid to know me. I wanted you in my actual life. He met her eyes. I still want that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved her hand the remaining inch. His hand turned over. Her hand settled into it. They sat at her kitchen table with the Beck family documentation spread between them and the jollof rice going cold in its pot and Seoul making its night sounds outside the window, and the particular specific weight of what they were choosing settled into the room quietly, without ceremony, like something that had always been coming and had simply finally arrived. One more thing, she said. What? If we're doing this, you need to understand that I am going to be involved. Not protected. Not managed. Involved. When there are problems, I am one of the people who helps solve them. Because I am apparently better at your legal strategy than your current attorney, and because I refuse to be someone who waits in rooms while things happen around her. He looked at her. Something lit in his expression. Something that looked, she thought, a lot like the word finally. Agreed, he said. Good. She turned back to the documents. Now tell me about the Beck family's legitimate business holdings, because there's a move in here that I think you haven't seen yet. He leaned in. Their shoulders were almost touching. Outside, Seoul continued its evening, indifferent and enormous and completely unaware that two people in a warm apartment on the edge of it had just quietly, and without announcement, decided to begin. The legal challenge framework that Arielle had built became, over the next few days, the center of several conversations she had not expected to be having. Shin Hyun-suk called her on a Thursday afternoon with 3 questions about her regulatory interpretation, and she answered them while standing in the hallway of her office building between meetings, her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, already late for something else. She answered them precisely, and then asked 2 follow-up questions of her own, and by the end of the call, they had extended her framework in 2 directions she hadn't initially considered. She told Jae-won about this over the phone that evening. He was at his office, and she was at hers, and they had gotten into the habit of a brief call around 6 before they each finished out their respective evenings, which was a small thing that had become, without discussion necessary. He's good, she said. Your attorney. Not as fast as he could be, but thorough. He said the same thing about you. In reverse. Fast but not as thorough. He said extraordinarily fast. And that he'd never seen anyone map a regulatory structure onto a liability framework in quite that way. A pause. He also said, and I want to be clear that these are his words and not mine, that you think like someone who has been reading the wrong side of arguments for a long time. She laughed at that. That is an extremely correct observation. He meant it as a compliment. I know he did. She sat down at her desk. The question is whether there's a way to use this that doesn't require actually filing. Because filing changes the dynamic. Filing means it's visible. Public. And I think the Beck family's behavior is at least partly predicated on the assumption that this would never go public. A pause. You're saying the threat is more valuable than the action. I'm saying there's a negotiating position here that doesn't require actually pulling the trigger. But it requires them to understand that you're genuinely willing to. She paused. Are you? Yes. They need to believe that. Then we'll make sure they do. She thought about that for a moment. The particular quality of a man who said yes to that kind of question without hesitation. It should have been alarming. It was not alarming. She had spent enough time adjacent to his world to understand the difference between willingness and eagerness, between someone who would do what was necessary and someone who was looking for the excuse. He was the former. Always had been. Jae-won, she said. Yes. I'm glad you walked through those doors. A pause. Brief. The particular weight of it. I almost didn't, he said. I know. She looked at her window. I'm glad you did anyway. Another pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the call. She had cataloged the different qualities of his silences by now, and this was the kind that meant he was sitting with something real. "Go finish your evening," he said finally. "I'll see you for dinner. Your place or mine?" "Yours. I'll bring food. Don't bring anything from a hotel restaurant." "I was going to cook." She paused. "Can you cook?" "A beat. I'm going to find out." She hung up smiling. She did not know if this was a good idea. She went back to her contracts. He arrived at 7:30 with ingredients rather than food, which suggested that the cooking was going to happen in her kitchen, which was either charming or catastrophic depending entirely on his actual skill level. She observed the ingredients and assessed decent raw materials, good quality protein, vegetables that suggested someone had thought about this, fresh ginger, doenjang, a handful of things that added up to something she recognized as the scaffolding of a jjigae. "Who told you how to make this?" she asked. "I grew up in a household with a cook." He set things on the counter. "I watched. I retained some of it. Watching and doing." "I know." He rolled up his sleeves. "I'm aware this might be a disaster." "I'll make rice," she said. "That way we have something to fall back on." He made the jjigae. It was genuinely good. Not perfect, slightly oversalted, missing something she identified as sesame oil and which she provided without comment, but good. The kind of good that suggested the watching had been thorough and the intention had been real. They ate. She added sesame oil to hers and did not mention it. He noticed and did not ask. This was, she thought, what compatibility actually looked like. Not the performance of it. The actual texture of two people eating together, aware of each other, choosing small mercies. "It's good," she said. "It's missing something. All first attempts miss something." She looked at him across the table. "The point is that you made it." He looked at her for a moment. "I wanted to do something useful." "You're already useful. You fund an entire restructuring of a criminal empire, and you have a team of people whose job is legal strategy." He paused. "That's not what I meant. I meant useful to you. In the specific ways that matter here. In this apartment. At this table." She looked at him. Warm kitchen. The remains of a meal he had made. Seoul making it sounds. "That," she said, "is useful." He looked something she was starting to learn to name. Not the controlled certainty he wore publicly. The other thing. The thing underneath, raw around the edges, human in the specific ways powerful men were not supposed to be, and always were anyway, underneath the structure. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Brief. Real. You don't have to earn your place at this table," she said. "You just have to show up for it." He looked at her hand. Then at her face. "Show me," he said quietly, "how to season jjigae properly." She showed him. They stood in her kitchen at 9 in the evening, and she walked him through the adjustments, and he paid attention with the quality that was one of his most genuine qualities, the one that had attracted her in the first place before she had understood anything else about him. The absolute, undivided attention. They washed the dishes together after. She washed. He dried. Exactly as they had always done. It was, she thought, a good evening. A real one. The kind that accumulated. The next 3 months moved with the particular rhythm of a thing being carefully constructed. Mornings, Arielle went to work and Jae-won went to his. They had decided this early. Separate days, evenings that belonged to them. She was not naive about what his days contained. She read between lines, and she had always been good at that, and she understood that restructuring an empire was not a clean or linear process. But he called when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. When things were difficult, he told her they were difficult without making it sound manageable when it wasn't. He was trying. It was different from before, in the 3 years ago version of things, when she had sometimes felt like she was being allowed glimpses into his world from a careful distance, as if the full view might break something. Now he pulled her in rather than holding her at arm's length. He had introduced her to his head of security, a man named Lim Kwon-soo, on the 3rd week, sitting across from them both in his office, and explaining the current threat landscape with the directness of someone who had decided transparency was a structural principle rather than a situational choice. She had asked Kwon-soo 3 questions that made him look at her with new assessment and answer differently than he'd started. After she left, apparently, Kwon-soo had told Jae-won, "She's better at reading situations than most of your lieutenants." Jae-won had relayed this to her over dinner that evening with something approaching pride. She had been touched and had not told him she was touched, because they were still in the early stage where showing too much felt like handing over something she wasn't ready to give. But she was getting there. The Beck family situation was the thread running underneath all of it. The move she had identified in the documentation, the one she had stayed up until midnight working through in her head that first evening, turned out to be significant. One of the Beck family's primary legal holdings, a shipping logistics company, was built on a contract structure that was technically valid but rested on a regulatory interpretation that Arielle had seen challenged successfully twice in the last 4 years. She knew the attorneys who had done the challenging. She knew the argument. She knew, because she had spent the next 3 days pulling documents at the office under the pretense of a client matter and cross-referencing everything, that the Beck family's ability to apply pressure was financially contingent on that shipping contract remaining unchallenged. She presented this to Jae-won on a Thursday evening. He sat across from her at his kitchen table, which was still the boardroom surface she had decided to overlook for now, and read through everything she had put together, and did not say anything for 4 minutes. Then he looked up. "You did this in 3 days. It's what I do. You built a full legal challenge framework for a company you've never worked for in 3 days between your actual client commitments, because you saw something in a document I handed you over dinner. You gave me an interesting problem," she said. "I can't help it." He looked at her for a long moment. "I need to introduce you to someone," he said. "Who?" "My attorney." He paused. "His name is Shin Hyun-suk. He has been my attorney for 7 years. He is, I now realize, significantly less good at this than you are." She felt a smile pull at the corner of her mouth. "I'm not working for you, Jae-won." "No," he agreed. "But you could advise. Informally. In the way that you apparently cannot stop doing anyway. You would need to be a client of my firm. That can be arranged. Through proper channels. Entirely." She looked at him. He looked at her. Something had shifted between them again, the particular slow reshuffling that happened when two people realized they fit together in ways they hadn't initially mapped. "Let me think about it," she said. Of course. She did think about it. For 1 week, during which the Beck situation escalated in a way that she only knew about because Jae-won called and told her about it with the particular quality of voice that meant things were more serious than his tone was conveying. One of his logistics operations in Incheon had been hit. No injuries, but a clear message. She thought about 2 things simultaneously: the professional complications of advising Jae-won through her firm, and the personal reality that the man she was rebuilding something with had just received a declaration of war from a family that now knew her name. She talked to Nia about the professional angle. Nia, who was a fashion editor and therefore had no useful legal expertise, was nonetheless excellent at cutting through to the essential question. Are you worried about the work being too complicated, or are you worried about being too involved in his life? Those aren't mutually exclusive. But which one is actually the issue? She thought about it. "Neither," she said slowly. "I think I'm worried about what it means when I stop thinking about whether to be involved and start just being involved." Nia put down her wine glass. "Honey, you have been involved since the second that man walked into a wedding venue. The only question now is whether you're going to pretend otherwise." She introduced herself to Shin Hyun-suk the following Monday as a courtesy. He was thorough and careful and entirely unsurprised by the legal challenge framework she presented, which she had refined over the weekend into something clean enough to take to court. He read through it and said it was solid and asked 2 questions that were good questions, and then said, "I'd wondered if there was another angle here. I hadn't found it yet." She said she could work with him if he wanted. He said he thought that would be useful. She called Jae-won on her way back to the office. "I spoke with your attorney." "I know. He called me." A pause. "He said you were, and I'm quoting here, extremely useful." High praise. From Shin Hyun-suk, it's essentially a standing ovation. Another pause. "Thank you. It's interesting work," she said. "And you need someone who can actually read a regulatory framework." "I need you," he said quietly. The words were simple. They landed without drama. She felt them settle in her chest in the particular way of things that were true. "I know," she said. A beat of quiet between them. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "Yes. Your place or mine?" "Mine. That table of yours is making me stressed." She heard what might have been a laugh. "I'll have something arranged. Don't buy anything. Come at 7. I'll cook. You don't have to." Jae-won. "Come at 7. A quiet. Yes." He arrived at 7 with a proper kitchen table in a flat-pack box and 2 of his security team to help put it together, which was arguably the most unexpected thing that had happened since he walked into the wedding, and which left her standing in her kitchen with a wooden spoon in her hand, staring at three men assembling furniture in her living room with the focused efficiency of people who usually assembled things of a much more dangerous nature. When they left and the table was up and she was standing at one end of it looking at him standing at the other, she said, "You bought me a table." It seemed relevant. "You put it together in my apartment. I was present during the process." He looked at the table. "Do you like it? I can have it replaced." She looked at the table. It was solid walnut, warm-toned, the right size for her apartment. It was the kind of table that people sat around for years, that accumulated the evidence of shared meals and conversations and the particular archaeology of a life lived alongside someone. "I like it," she said. He nodded once. He came around to her side of the kitchen to help with the cooking, which turned out to mean standing slightly behind her left shoulder while she worked and asking questions about the recipe and handing her things from the wrong shelf and being corrected, and then remembering the right shelf, which was not particularly helpful in a practical sense, but was, she found, a very specific kind of companionable. They ate at the new table. They talked about the Beck situation and about her week at the firm and about a news story she had been following about a property rights case in Jeju and about his plans to expand the legitimate hospitality business into a new district. She told him about the restaurant she wanted to open someday, not as a career change, but as a side thing, something her own, somewhere that served Ghanaian food done properly, because she had not found a single place in Seoul that did it well. He asked questions about this with the kind of attention that meant he was filing it away. She made a note to tell him explicitly not to do anything about it before she was ready, because she knew exactly what he would do with that information if she gave him an opening. After dinner they sat on her couch with the remains of the wine and the particular quality of ease that had been building between them for 3 months, that comfortable specific warmth that was different from the charged electricity of the beginning. Not less but different, deeper somehow, the way a fire settles into coals that hold heat longer than the first flame. She was leaning against his shoulder. This had happened sometime in the last hour without either of them noting it. His hand was resting on her knee. This had also happened without announcement. "My mother called again," she said. "About us. About you. She's decided she has opinions. Are they good opinions or bad opinions? She says you looked at me at that wedding like a man who had already made a decision and was just waiting for his body to catch up to it." A pause. "Your mother is perceptive. She's terrifying, is what she is." Arielle looked at the table across the room. "She wants to meet you. I told her it was too soon." "What did she say?" "She said, too soon for what? You're already cooking for him." He said nothing. She could feel, where her head rested against his shoulder, the particular stillness of him thinking something through. "She's right," he said. "You are cooking for me. I cook for lots of people. Not at this table." She looked up at him. He was looking at her. This close, she could see the gold ring around his irises that most people probably never got close enough to notice, and the scar through his brow that she had traced once and thought about often since, and the expression in his eyes that was the same expression she had been reading for months now. The one that meant she was the fixed point in a moving room. "I'm falling for you," she said. In case it wasn't clear. He was very still. "It's different from before," she continued. "Before I was falling because you were compelling and new and frightening in the way of things I hadn't encountered before. This time it's slower. It's like I actually see you this time." She paused. "Which is more terrifying, honestly." He turned toward her slightly. His hand came up to her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw in the slow, precise way of someone who had been thinking about doing that and was finally allowing himself. "I have been in love with you," he said, "since the second Thursday of March 3 years and 8 months ago." She blinked. "That's very specific. You came to my apartment and we argued about the property development case for 2 hours, and then you fell asleep on my couch reading a contract, and I covered you with a blanket and sat there watching you sleep like someone who had completely lost the ability to be sensible, and I understood, very clearly and very inconveniently, that this was it for me." A pause. "I had been trying to talk myself out of it since the gala, and that night I accepted that I couldn't." She looked at him. "And then you let me go. And then I made the worst mistake of my life." His eyes held hers. "I'm not going to make it again." She leaned up and kissed him. It was not tentative or exploratory. It was 3 months of careful reconstruction and 8 months before that of being in pieces and 3 years of pretending she was over it. And it was the specific truth of two people who knew each other's worst moments and had decided to be in the same room with them anyway. It was real, and it tasted like coming home to a home she had always known existed and had not been sure she was allowed to have. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She felt the particular quality of a serious thing incoming. The Beck situation. He pulled back slightly so she could see his face. "There have been developments in the last 48 hours. The legal challenge framework you built is working. They know it's coming. They've responded." He paused. Baek Han-jun reached out directly. "To me. He wants to meet." "That's good. It's progress. Possibly. Or it's a provocation. I'm not sure yet." He held her gaze. "I told him I'd meet him next week. I wanted you to know before I went. I want to come. Arielle. Not to the meeting. I know that's not how this works. But I want to know what you're going in to say, and I want to be the person you call immediately after. Not 3 days later. Immediately." He nodded. "Yes. And before you go, I want to review whatever legal position you're taking into that room. Because there may be angles even Shin Hyun-suk hasn't seen." He looked at her with that expression again. The one that said something quietly enormous. "You know you are," he stopped. "Tried again. You are nothing like anyone I have ever." "I know," she said. "That's not a bad thing. I know that too." He kissed her again, briefer this time, but with the specific quality of someone making a small certain promise. Outside, Seoul was doing its late-night thing. The table they were sitting at was new and already theirs in some inarticulate way. The wine was almost finished. The Beck situation was not yet resolved. There were, as there had always been in this world, complications and dangers and things that would require navigating carefully. But in this apartment, in this specific moment, two people who had chosen each other the second time around, and therefore more truly were choosing again. Quietly, without ceremony, the way the real things always happened. 3 weeks later, the meeting with Baek Han-jun occurred on a Tuesday afternoon in a hotel conference room in Gangnam. Jae-won went in with Kwon-soo and Shin Hyun-suk, and the framework Arielle had built refined down to its essential edges. She went to work and reviewed contracts and sent him one text at noon. Asterisk, don't be the most patient person in the room. Let him feel the urgency first. Asterisk. He sent back. Since when do you know negotiation tactics? She sent back. Asterisk, I have been in boardrooms with men who think they hold all the cards for 10 years. I know the game. Asterisk. He did not respond to that, which meant he was already in the room. She waited. She worked. She did not check her phone every 3 minutes, which she absolutely checked every 3 minutes. And at 3:47 in the afternoon it rang. "It's done," he said. "What's done?" "The Beck family is withdrawing from the disputed territory in exchange for the legal challenge being suspended rather than filed. They retain their shipping holdings. We retain the Incheon operation with full security rights. Neither party acknowledges the incident." A pause. "It's not perfect. It's clean enough? For now. Shin Hyun-suk wants to keep the challenge framework on file. In case they move again." He's right. He also said, and I am quoting directly, "If Ms. Osei ever considers leaving her current firm, please let me know." A pause. "I told him she already had offers." "I don't have offers." "You will." She smiled despite herself. "Are you okay?" "Yes." He said it simply. "Better than I was this morning. Come to dinner." "I was already planning to." "Good." She paused. "Jae-won." "Yes. I'm proud of you." She said it the way she meant it, directly, without wrapping it in qualifications. That was the right call. Resolving it without resolving it this way. A silence. Longer than his usual ones. "Thank you," he said finally. Like the words cost something, and he was paying willingly. He came to dinner. They ate at the walnut table with the city going dark outside, and she told him about her day, and he told her about the meeting, and they argued briefly about the terms of the Beck agreement, her position being that they had given up slightly more than necessary, and his position being that a clean resolution was worth the cost. And they landed somewhere in the middle of that argument, the way they always landed in the middle of things. Not because either of them had surrendered, but because they had actually heard each other. After, she was washing dishes, and he was beside her drying them, which was a small domesticity that she had not been prepared for, and that was doing something significant to the general architecture of her feelings about all of this. He was very carefully drying a bowl when he said, without looking up, "I want to meet your mother." She turned to look at him. What? When you're ready. I want to meet her. He looked up. She sounds like someone who would tell me the truth about what she thought, and I could use more of that. Arielle looked at him. This man who had walked into a wedding and said she was his and had spent 3 months proving that he meant something real by it, drying her dishes in her kitchen. She will absolutely tell you the truth, she said. She will probably say things that are uncomfortable. Good. He went back to the bowl. I've had enough comfortable. She turned back to the dishes. She was smiling at the sink, and she let herself smile at the sink because no one was watching. I'll call her tomorrow, she said. Not tonight. Tonight I have other things to think about. She handed him another dish without looking at him. She felt, rather than saw, the moment he understood what she meant. The particular still quality of him becoming aware. She turned the tap off. She turned around. He was already looking at her. The kitchen was quiet. The table was behind him. The city was outside the window doing what it always did, indifferent and vast and completely unrelated to what was happening in this specific room. She crossed to him. His hands were still holding the dish towel. She took it from him and set it on the counter and looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and neither of them said anything because they had both gotten very good in the last 3 months at saying things without words. He kissed her slowly this time, with the particular quality of something that was not rushed because it understood it had time. His hands came up, one along the side of her face and one at her waist, careful and certain simultaneously, and she felt herself lean into him in the way of someone who has finally stopped calculating the risk of leaning. She would tell him later what it felt like. She would find the words eventually. Right now, with his arms around her in her kitchen at the end of a Tuesday that had resolved things that needed resolving, and with the new table behind him and her mother's number in her phone for tomorrow, she simply let herself be present inside the feeling. The specific, warm, solid certainty of someone choosing you. Of you choosing them back. Of neither of you being afraid. Later, much later, she was lying with her head against his shoulder in the dark. The city a low orange glow beyond the curtains. The room quiet and warm. Tell me something true, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I thought about you every day, he said. For 3 years. Every single day. Some days I thought about the version of you that probably would have grown to resent me eventually, just to make the distance feel less like a wound. A pause. It didn't work. What did you think about? Specific things. The way you argue when you know you're right. The way you cook like it's a conversation you're having with the recipe. The way you looked at me at that gala like I was just a man at a bar. He paused. The way you looked at me last night. She was quiet for a moment. I thought about you too, she said. I'm not going to tell you every day because I worked very hard not to make it every day. But often. I know. You don't know. I know that you moved your hand across the table in that cafe, he said. I know that you called me when there was a man outside your building instead of calling the police. I know that you built a legal challenge framework in 3 days and presented it to me over dinner because you could not help yourself. A pause. I know you. She thought about that. You do, she said. Which is still terrifying. Yes, he agreed. For both of us. They lay in the quiet. The city breathed outside. She thought about 3 years and 7 months and the specific archaeology of how they had arrived here. She thought about her mother's voice. That man looked at you like you were the only fixed point. She thought about walnut tables and 2-week silences and a man who had shown up at a wedding and said 3 words that turned out to contain a decade's worth of truth. She thought about what came next. She thought about the fact that she was not afraid of what came next. That felt, she decided, like enough for tonight. She closed her eyes. He pulled her slightly closer without waking. The particular instinctive quality of someone doing something they've been waiting to do for long enough that it's become automatic. Seoul went about its night. Inside, something that had been broken for a long time was in the process of being made whole. It was not a fast process. It was not a clean one. But it was real. And the real things she was learning were always worth the work. The thing about building something real was that it required the ordinary as much as the extraordinary. The extraordinary moments, the declarations and the resolutions, and the evenings that changed everything, those were the structure. But it was the ordinary that filled the structure in and made it a life rather than just a story. The ordinary looked like this. Thursday mornings when she had early calls and he made coffee that was too strong, and she drank it anyway. Friday evenings when she came home late and he was already there, on her couch with a book he wasn't really reading because he was waiting. Weekends when she ran and he ran alongside her, which she had not invited and had not objected to, and which became one of the rhythms she would later understand as a marker of how far they had come. Arguments about genuinely small things, the kind of arguments that were actually about nothing except the particular friction of two people with strong opinions occupying the same space, which always resolved themselves by the time they reached whatever they had been heading toward when the argument started. The way he remembered things she mentioned once, in passing, not as weapons or leverage, but simply because he was paying attention, and paying attention was how he loved. The way she kept a spare set of his preferred coffee beans in her cabinet without discussing this with anyone, including him. These things accumulated. She talked to Nia about it one afternoon over lunch, the kind of honest conversation she had with Nia that she did not have with many people. "You're domesticated," Nia said. "I mean this in the most complimentary possible way. You are gloriously, completely domesticated. I don't live with him yet. You have his coffee. I have coffee that happens to be his preferred brand." Nia gave her the look she reserved for people who were being technically accurate in ways that missed the entire point. "Arielle, how long has he had a key to your apartment?" A pause. "He has keys in case of emergency." "When did you give them to him?" 6 weeks ago." "Has there been an emergency?" "No." "Has he used the key?" A longer pause. "He comes by sometimes. On his way somewhere. For coffee." Nia looked at her with the serene expression of someone who has been right for some time and is choosing not to belabor it. "His coffee. That you keep at your apartment. For when he comes by." "Oh, be quiet. I'm not saying a word," Nia said, and signaled for the check with the air of someone who considered the case settled. She thought about what Nia had said on her way back to the office. She thought about keys and coffee and Friday evenings and what it meant that she had constructed, without entirely planning to, the infrastructure of a shared life. She thought about whether this was the thing she had been afraid of when she had said she needed time. Not Jae-won specifically, but this. The way it happened gradually, and then completely. The way you stopped tracking the increments and looked up and realized you had arrived somewhere without taking a single dramatic step in that direction. She thought about whether she was afraid. She was not afraid. She was, if she was honest, relieved to not be afraid. 3 years of maintaining distance had been exhausting in the specific way of sustained effort. Vigilance that had cost her without her noticing how much until it stopped. She went back to her office. She reviewed her afternoon contracts. At 5:30 she sent him a text that said, "I told Nia about the coffee situation." His reply came 4 minutes later. "The emergency coffee?" She sent back, "She is not fooled." A pause. "Then neither are you." She looked at her phone. She set it face down on her desk. She was smiling at a contract review, and she did not care. That evening she called her mother, who was in Accra teaching a class on Adichie and had, in her characteristically divided fashion, already been texting Arielle links to wedding venues she had found on the internet without any indication that anyone had mentioned anything about a wedding. "Mama," she said, "we are not there yet." "I'm not implying anything," her mother said. "I'm just sending links. Informational. You sent 7 in the last 2 weeks. I like architecture." A pause. "He has been good to you." "Yes." "And honest." "Yes." She paused. "More than I expected." "That's because you expected what he was before," her mother said. "People change. Not always. But sometimes. When the thing they change for is worth it." She sat with that for a moment. "He said he loves me," she said. She had told her mother this already, but she said it again because it was the kind of thing she was still getting used to having said. "I know," her mother said. "He told me the same thing." Arielle went very still. "He called you." "He called me," her mother agreed. "A week before the cafe meeting. He asked if I thought it was a mistake to try. He asked what I thought you would need. He didn't tell me that. He asked me not to. He said he didn't want you to think he was trying to build alliances around you rather than just asking you directly." A pause. "I thought it was a good instinct." Arielle thought about a man who had spent 3 years understanding his own worst impulses and had arrived at calling a woman's mother before a conversation rather than attempting to control the outcome of it. She thought about small evidence of change, the kind that mattered more than grand gestures. "He's trying," she said. "Yes," her mother agreed. People who are only performing effort don't call mothers before the conversation. They perform after. She was quiet for a moment. "He's going to ask to meet you," she said. "Soon. I can tell." "I know," her mother said. "I've been expecting it." A pause. "Tell him to bring palm wine." Arielle's mother, Professor Arielle Osei, arrived in Seoul on a Friday morning in December with 2 suitcases, strong opinions about the city's organization of its airport, and an expression that suggested she had already decided to like it and was simply waiting for a reason to confirm this. Arielle met her at arrivals and felt the particular complicated love of seeing her mother after 8 months apart. Her mother was 62 and looked 50 and had the posture of a woman who had spent 40 years telling rooms full of students to pay attention. She embraced Arielle with the force of someone who had been holding the hug in reserve since August, and then stepped back and looked at her daughter with the specific assessment of a woman who was reading the whole story in one glance. "You look settled," her mother said. "Not happy, not okay. Settled." "I feel settled," Arielle said. "When do I meet him?" "Tonight. Dinner at mine." Her mother made a sound that contained an entire position paper on the subject. He arrived at 7, as he always arrived, precisely. He had asked her 3 times that week if there was anything specific her mother liked or disliked, and she had told him 3 times that the best thing he could do was be himself and not try to manage the situation. He had taken this advice with visible difficulty. He brought palm wine. This was what he had landed on after the 3 conversations, and she still was not entirely sure how he had arrived at palm wine. But her mother's face when she saw it was one she would remember for a long time. "Where did you find this?" her mother asked, holding the bottle. "I have access to a fairly wide network of importers," he said. "When Arielle told me you were from Accra, I looked into what was available." Her mother looked at him over the bottle. "She told me you were thoughtful," she said. She said it like it surprised her. "It surprised me too," he said. Her mother laughed. A real laugh, the kind that arrived without planning. She set the bottle down and looked at him in the full assessment way she had of looking at people, the way that made most people feel slightly transparent. "You hurt my daughter," she said. Not angry. Factual. "Yes," he said. "You know that." "I do." "And what exactly has changed?" He told her. Not the empire restructuring version, not the legal framework version. He told her the truth, which was that he had spent 3 years understanding what he had thrown away and what it cost, and what he was willing to give in exchange for the chance to be better than the person who had made that choice. He told her about his mother, the one who had said power without love was just loneliness with better furniture. He told her about the specific day in March 3 years and 8 months ago, and what he had understood sitting in a room watching Arielle sleep. Her mother listened to all of this without interruption. This was unusual. Her mother interrupted regularly and pointedly in the classroom context, because she found that people said more interesting things when they knew they might be cut off. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "My daughter," she said, "is one of the most capable women I have ever known. She argues with me about sentence structure, and she is right approximately 60% of the time, which is more than anyone else. She does not need protecting." She paused. "What she needs is someone who understands that she is an entire world unto herself and chooses to be alongside that world, not in front of it." He looked at her mother steadily. "That's what I want." "Then we'll see," her mother said and picked up her glass. "Now, tell me about this palm wine source because I have not been able to find it in Accra, and I know people in Accra." Dinner was loud and warm, and her mother held court from the end of the walnut table, while Arielle cooked and Jae-won sat at the counter and answered questions with the careful honesty of someone who had decided to commit to a principle regardless of the cost. Her mother asked about his empire, which he answered. She asked about his plans for it, which he answered. She asked what he had done in the last 3 years besides regret things, and this answer took longer, but he gave it. At some point during the main course, her mother looked at the table and said, "Did you choose this table?" "He brought it," Arielle said from the kitchen. "In a box." Her mother looked at him. He looked at her mother. Something passed between them that was its own entire conversation. "Good table," her mother said. After dinner, when Arielle was in the kitchen and her mother was pretending to be interested in a book she had found on the shelf, Jae-won appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Your mother just told me I owe her a bottle of palm wine annually for the rest of my natural life as a condition of her approval," he said quietly. Arielle turned from the sink. "That sounds like her." She also said, he paused. "She said that Arielle cried for 6 months after she left my apartment and then spent 2 years learning to pretend she hadn't." Arielle felt something move through her chest. She turned fully to face him. "She shouldn't have told you that," she said. "No," he agreed. "She probably shouldn't." He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her. "I'm sorry. For those 6 months. For the 2 years after. For all of it. She looked at him. I know you are. That's not enough. No, she agreed. But it's where we start. She reached up and touched the scar through his left brow. She had done this once before, half asleep in an apartment that no longer existed. Now she did it in her own kitchen, in her own home, in her own life that was beginning to contain him properly rather than in the guarded peripheral way she had allowed before. We start from where we are, not from where we should have been. He turned his face into her hand for a moment. Something very quiet and very real. Yes, he said. Her mother's voice floated in from the living room. You're both very quiet in there. I hope you're not being boring. We're being appropriate, Arielle called back. At your age you can afford to be slightly less appropriate, her mother said. He laughed. A real one. It did something to his face she had always loved and had not let herself think about. She loved him. She had known this for some time. She had been waiting until the knowledge was solid enough to hold weight before she did anything with it. It was solid now. I love you, she said. Simply. The way she said things she meant. He looked at her. The gold in his irises. The scar she had touched. The expression that had always said she was the only fixed point. I love you, he said. I have for 3 years and 8 months, and I'm not going to waste any more time being someone who doesn't say it. From the living room. Finally. I have been waiting for that for approximately 4 months. Arielle closed her eyes. She was listening the entire time. I suspect your mother never stops listening. It's how she taught for 40 years. Arielle pressed her lips together against the smile that was happening regardless of her intentions. She is exhausting and I love her desperately. I can tell, he said. He sounded like he meant it as a compliment to both of them. Her mother stayed for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, she took 3 walking tours of Seoul neighborhoods that Arielle had recommended and 2 that she had found herself, made friends with the woman who ran the cafe on the corner, had 2 separate dinners at Jae-won's apartment which she described afterward as having the aesthetic of a very expensive waiting room and the energy of a man who had clearly been furnished by professionals and had never once eaten a meal there that was not delivered, and told Jae-won directly that he needed a real kitchen and something on the walls that was not abstract enough to be about everything and therefore about nothing. He replaced 2 of the paintings the week after she left. He sent Arielle a picture. She sent back a single laughing emoji and then a real message that said she's not wrong though. He sent back, *no. She is not, *. The months that followed built themselves the way months do when they are part of something real. Accumulating, layering, the particular sedimentation of a shared life taking form. She began working formally with Shin Hyun-suk as an outside advisor on the Kang legitimate holdings, a relationship structured carefully enough to be professional and personal enough to mean that she was always present in the strategic decisions in some capacity. She did not give up her position at her own firm. She was, in fact, made partner in the spring of the following year, an event she celebrated with her mother via video call, and with Jae-won over dinner at a restaurant she had made a reservation for herself because she had promised herself she would always make her own reservations. He gave her flowers the next morning. Not a bouquet. A single stem of something complicated and architectural that he had clearly spent time selecting. She put it in a glass on the walnut table and looked at it throughout the day while she worked from home. The empire continued its restructuring. It was slower than either of them would have liked and more complicated than the clean linear version Jae-won had initially described. There were setbacks. The Beck family situation, resolved in theory, required monitoring. There were other families, other pressures, other moments when the world that had been built before she arrived tried to assert its claim on him. He called her through all of it. This was what she had asked for. This was what he gave her. Not protection from information, but participation in it. The specific trust of being told difficult things without the sanitizing layer of management. There were nights she did not sleep well because of what she knew. There were mornings she looked at the city from her window and felt the weight of the world she was adjacent to. But she had known who he was since that gala. She had chosen knowing. The difference now was that he was choosing alongside her. In June, 9 months after the wedding that wasn't, she moved into his apartment. Not dramatically. Not with announcement. She had been spending so much time there that the distinction between her apartment and his had become largely administrative. She kept her apartment for another month while she decided, and then she decided, and she told the movers to take the walnut table first because it was the most important thing, and she wanted to be sure it arrived intact. He cleared an entire wall of shelving for her books. This was not a small gesture. The shelving had contained, apparently, various objects of value and significance to his previous existence in the space, and he had relocated all of them to a single designated cabinet so that she could have the wall for books and, it turned out, for photographs. She put photographs up without asking. Family pictures. Her mother. Nia at a party, laughing at something off camera. A photo taken at the Gangnam Charity Gala, her and Jae-won standing near the bar where they had first spoken, which she had found in an archive on the event's website and which she had printed and put up in the center of the wall. He saw it and said nothing. He stood looking at it for a long moment. "That's the night you found the only decent wine," he said finally. "And the night you moved out of the way when someone asked you to," she said. "I don't typically move out of the way." "I know." She came to stand beside him. "That's why I kept the photo." He looked at her sidelong. The particular expression that still did things to her after 9 months of accumulation. He put his arm around her. They stood looking at the photograph from a gala 3 years and 11 months ago, in an apartment that now contained her books and her table and the evidence of her existence everywhere you looked. And outside the window Seoul was doing what Seoul did, indifferent and blazing and utterly uninterested in the specific geography of their happiness. She was not afraid. She had not been afraid in a long time. 7 months later, Jae-won took her to Jeju Island. He told her it was a work trip. It was not a work trip, as she understood approximately 2 minutes after they arrived, because there was no discernible work occurring, and the private house they were staying in had a view of the ocean and a kitchen stocked with ingredients for jollof rice that she had not bought herself. "You planned this," she said. "I plan things." He set their bags down. "It's one of my qualities. We're not here for work." "No." She looked at him. He was looking at her with the expression that had first appeared when she had moved her hand across the table in a cafe. The expression that meant he was doing something that cost him something and had decided the cost was worth it. "Then why are we here?" she said. He reached into his jacket pocket. He brought out a box that was small and dark blue and clearly expensive in the way that things associated with Kang Jae-won were always clearly expensive. She went very still. "You can say no," he said. "I want to be very clear that you can say no. That is a genuine option and not a courtesy statement." "I know it is," she said. "I also want to be clear that this is not a gesture designed to resolve anything or create an obligation or change the balance of power in any direction." He paused. "It's just," he stopped. "Try it again. I want you to be mine in every way I can manage. Legally. Permanently. I want to be yours. I want to have the kind of claim on each other that means something when everything else moves." He looked at her. "I want to marry you, Arielle. If you're willing." She looked at the box. She looked at him. She thought about 3 years and 7 months, and the particular archaeology of everything that had led to this moment. She thought about a wedding she had walked away from. She thought about relief. About being the only fixed point. About palm wine and walnut tables and a wall full of books and a photograph in the center of all of it. She thought about her mother, who would say "I told you so" exactly once and then never again, and who would probably also arrange to fly to Seoul within 48 hours, and who would absolutely make Jae-won pay for the wedding cake. She thought about what she actually wanted, which was this, had always been this, since before she was ready to admit it. "Yes," she said. He opened the box. She looked at the ring, which was nothing she would have picked herself, and which was also exactly right in a way she couldn't immediately explain. A classic setting with a stone that caught the light and a band that was narrow and clean. He had chosen it like he chose things, with precision and care and the particular attention of someone who had been paying attention. He slid it onto her finger, both of them looking at it for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "You brought jollof rice ingredients," she said. "I did. That might be the most romantic thing about this entire thing." He was smiling. Actually smiling, the full version that she had been collecting like evidence since that first evening in the cafe. "Your priorities are very clear. I like to know where I stand." She held up her hand, looked at the ring. "You know my mother is going to act like she wasn't waiting for this." "She called me last month," he said. She turned to look at him. "She what?" "To tell me that she trusted my judgment on most things, but that if I was going to ask you anything important I should do it somewhere that had a view of the water, because you had always found the water clarifying." He paused. "She also told me what stone to get because she said you always looked longest at that kind in jewelry store windows, but would never buy it for yourself." Arielle looked at the ring. Then at him. She did not have words for what she felt. That was unusual for her. She was a person who dealt in language, who had spent her career finding the precise sentence for complicated things. Right now, standing on Jeju Island with the ocean making its constant sound beyond the window and a ring on her finger that her mother had helped choose, she had none. She pulled him in and kissed him instead. They stood there for a long time, in that kitchen with the jollof rice ingredients waiting on the counter, and the ocean outside, and Seoul somewhere on the other side of the water, going about its life, indifferent and vast and completely irrelevant to what was happening here. They cooked together that evening. She made the jollof rice, and he stood slightly behind her left shoulder and asked questions about the recipe and handed her things from the wrong shelf, which she had stopped correcting because it turned out she liked telling him the right shelf. The ring caught the kitchen light every time she moved her hand. She was aware of it the way you were aware of something new that was also somehow immediately familiar. After they ate, they sat on the terrace with the remains of the wine and watched the ocean go dark and then blacker, and then into the particular night dark of somewhere genuinely away from city light. Stars. She had forgotten what stars looked like at this concentration. Seoul swallowed them. "When did you know?" she asked. "That you wanted to ask me." He was quiet for a moment. "There was a moment in October," he said. "You were reviewing documents at the kitchen table, and you had your reading glasses on. I told you not to mention the reading glasses. And you were making notes in the margin in 3 different colors, and you were muttering to yourself about regulatory frameworks. And I was watching you from the doorway, and I thought, this is it. This is the specific version of life I want. This table. This person. This exact kind of ordinary." She looked at him. "Muttering about regulatory frameworks. Yes, that's what did it. You are incredibly specific when you're thinking through a problem," he said. "I find it, the honest word is irresistible." She shook her head. "You are a strange man. You've known that since the gala." She had. She absolutely had. She looked out at the ocean. The stars were extraordinary. She thought about moving toward things rather than away from them. She thought about the specific courage of choosing a second time, knowing everything the first time cost. "I want to open the restaurant," she said. "Not someday. Actually, I want to start planning it." He turned to look at her. "When?" "After the wedding. I've been thinking about the space. I know the neighborhood I want. I know what I want it to feel like." She paused. "I need a name." "What kind of name?" "Something that's both of us," she said. "Something that says this is where you come when you want to be somewhere real." He thought about it for a moment. "What's the Chui word for home?" "Phi," she said. "Phi," he repeated slowly in his accent. It sounded different from her, but not wrong. "Can it be that simple?" "The best names usually are." She looked at him. "You speak Korean and Japanese and English, and you want to name a restaurant with a Chui word." "I want to name it with your language," he said. "Because it's yours. Because that matters." She looked at the stars. She thought about being seen. Really seen. The way it felt different from being looked at. The way she had spent 3 years telling herself she was fine and being approximately fine, and how different fine felt from this. From the specific full-weight reality of sitting on a terrace at night with a man who had chosen her language for a restaurant because it was hers and because that mattered to him. "Phi," she said. "Phi," he agreed. They sat with the ocean until it was very late. They talked about the wedding, which they both agreed would be small and real and not at the Grand Hyatt Seoul, and about the restaurant, and about what it meant to build things that lasted. They talked about her mother and about his father, who had called once, 3 months ago, and who Jae-won had answered and spoken to for 20 minutes, and hung up, and told her only that it had been complicated, and that he was processing it, and that he would talk about it when he was ready. She had not pushed. He had told her about it eventually, on a night when they were both very tired, and the truth came easier. His father was ill. The empire he had built was cracking in ways that only became visible when the person who had controlled it could no longer maintain the control. Jae-won had sent money. He had not gone back. She had not told him what to feel about that. She had held his hand while he figured it out. That was what it meant to be alongside someone. Not deciding for them. Not protecting them from the difficulty. Just being present in it, a fixed point in a moving room, returning the favor. Later that night, in a house full of ocean sounds and stars, she lay awake for a while in the particular way you lie awake when something enormous has happened and your mind needs to run through it several times to make sure it's real. She felt the ring on her finger. She listened to him breathing beside her, deep and even, asleep with the particular quality of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally put it down. She thought about what came next. It did not frighten her. The restaurant would open in the spring, in a space in Itaewon that she had walked past once and filed away. It would seat 42 people and have warm lighting and serve jollof rice done properly alongside dishes from a menu that Arielle would design and revise 6 times before she was satisfied. On the wall by the entrance there would be a photograph of a woman and a man at a gala, standing near a bar, neither of them yet understanding what the night would eventually mean. And on the night it opened, her mother would fly from Accra and occupy the table by the window and hold court for the entire evening, and send back every dessert until the 4th try, which she would declare acceptable, and she would not once say she had known how this would end all along. She would not have to. The wedding would take place in April, in a small garden in Songbuk-dong, a property belonging to a friend of hers who had more outdoor space than she needed. 40 people. Jollof rice at the reception because Arielle had insisted and Jae-won had agreed without a single argument, which she took as evidence of genuine love. Her mother would give the toast, which would last 15 minutes and would reference Chinua Achebe twice, and would make several people cry. Nia would cry openly and claim she wasn't. Lim Kwon-soo, who had been invited because he was in some way family at this point, would stand with his arms crossed and his face perfectly still for the entire ceremony, and would be found later in the corner absolutely definitely not crying about anything. Jae-won would see her coming down the garden path in an ivory dress with her braids woven with white and gold, a palette that was not timeless, that was entirely specific to 2 people and 1 story, and his expression would be the expression she had learned to read over a year and a half of being truly known by someone. The fixed point. The only thing in the room that mattered. She would think, walking toward him through the garden with her mother at her side. I have walked away from and toward this same person twice now. The second time is the real time. The second time is the one that counts. She would not be afraid. At the altar, which was a wooden arch wound with greenery because she had simple tastes about certain things and grand tastes about others, he would take her hands. She would look at him. He would look at her. The officiant would say the words that people say at weddings, the ones about covenant and choosing, and what it means to do this in front of witnesses. And when she said yes, she would mean it in every direction, in every tense, looking at the same man she had looked at in a doorway one October evening and felt the particular specific relief of being found. And after, when the evening had wound down and the guests had gone and her mother was being driven to her hotel by one of Kwon-soo's men, who had apparently decided this was simply part of his responsibilities now, she and Jae-won would stand alone in the garden with the fairy lights still strung overhead and the city making its sounds beyond the walls. He would look at her and say nothing. She would look at him and say nothing. They had gotten very good at this, at the things that did not need words. Then she would say, "We should go home." And he would say, "Yes." And they would go to the apartment that contained her wall of books and the walnut table and the photograph from the gala, and 2 people who had chosen each other the wrong way once and the right way after that, and had decided that the second version was worth everything the first had cost. To the city that neither of them fully belonged to and both of them had made theirs. To the morning that would arrive with its contracts and its complications, and its restructuring that was still in progress, and its restaurant that was coming in the spring, and its ordinary specific beauty of 2 people who had finally stopped being afraid of the real thing. She would wake up before him, as she always did, and stand at the window in the early light looking at Seoul going about its morning, indifferent and blazing and enormous. She would think about what they had built. Not the empire. Not the legitimate holdings or the shipping routes or the legal frameworks. The thing in this apartment. The life. The specific shape of 2 people choosing each other consistently, day after day, in the ordinary way that was also the only way that mattered. She would feel the ring on her finger. She would feel the morning. She would feel, in the center of herself, the quiet, solid certainty of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. She would not be afraid. She would go make coffee. She would hear him stir. She would hear him cross to the kitchen. She would feel his hands on her shoulders, his chin resting on top of her head, both of them looking out at the city they shared. She would lean back into him. He would pull her closer. Outside, Seoul would go on being what it was. Vast and indifferent and full of people colliding and separating and making choices they would spend years understanding. Inside, 2 people who had spent 3 years apart and a year and a half learning to do it right would stand in a kitchen in the morning light, neither of them saying anything, because some things did not need to be said. They had already said them. They had said them with every honest conversation, and every meal cooked side by side, and every document shared, and every phone call made when things were difficult, and every moment one of them had chosen truth over comfort. They had been saying them for a year and a half in every form a thing could be said. They would keep saying them. Every day. For a very long time. This was the empire that mattered. This was the one worth building. And Kang Jae-won, who had walked into a wedding and said 3 words and meant every syllable of them, had finally, completely, become someone worthy of the woman who had looked at him across a bar and asked him to move. And Arielle Osei, who had walked away from an altar in a dress she would never wear again toward a man she had never stopped loving, had finally, completely stopped running. And Seoul went on. And they stayed.